Ilara had always known the sharp sting of her stepmother's words. Every morning, as she passed the tall mirrors in the castle's long corridors, her stepmother's voice echoed in her mind. "You are too plain, too weak. No one will ever choose you. You are not fit to attend the mating ceremony." These words had become a shadow that clung to her, curling around her like a second skin. The castle itself seemed to echo with her stepmother's disdain. Its high towers pierced the clouds, its stone walls were cold and gray, and the halls were alive with whispers of beauty, nobility, and power. Everywhere Ilara looked, she saw women admired for their elegance, their grace, their perfection. And everywhere she looked, she saw herself fading into the background. Yet, there was a quiet strength in Ilara that no one recognized, not even herself. Beneath her stepmother's cruelty, beneath the whispers of her own doubts, there was a spark of courage, resilience, and a rare kind of beauty that was not measured by mirrors or gowns. It was a beauty born of heart, of soul, and of something deeper that had yet to awaken. The mating ceremony was approaching, and the castle was alive with preparation. Servants moved like shadows through the corridors, carrying silk and jewels, arranging flowers that glowed with enchantment, and lighting candles that flickered like tiny stars. The court buzzed with excitement. Every noblewoman dreamed of being chosen by the Alpha King, the legendary ruler whose presence was said to command both loyalty and fear. Ilara, however, was not allowed to dream. Her stepmother had forbidden her to attend the ceremony, insisting that she remain in the shadows of the household, hidden from the eyes of the court. "It is for your own good," her stepmother had said, though Ilara knew better. It was to humiliate her, to ensure that she never stood where queens and princesses shone. On the morning of the ceremony, Ilara stood at the edge of her small chamber, gazing out at the misty forest that surrounded the castle. The sun was just rising, casting silver light over the treetops. She could hear the distant sound of horns announcing the beginning of the ceremony. Her heart ached with longing and fear. She wanted to run, to hide, but a part of her ached for something more, something she did not yet understand. A soft knock at her door made her turn. A small, elderly servant, one of the few who had always treated her kindly, stepped inside. "Mistress Ilara," the woman said, her voice gentle, "I have seen your stepmother preparing for the ceremony. She will not let you attend. But there is a way. The corridors are crowded. If you are quick and careful." Lara's eyes widened. Her heart leaped with hope and fear. Could she defy her stepmother? Could she step into the world that had always seemed forbidden to her? The servant nodded, understanding the silent question. "The Alpha King. He is said to sense those who are destined. Perhaps he will see you even if no one else does." Lara hesitated. She had always believed herself invisible, unworthy of attention or admiration. And yet, a strange pull in her chest urged her forward. She wrapped a simple cloak around her shoulders, smoothed the thin veil that covered her face, and stepped into the castle corridors. The shadows seemed to watch her, moving as she moved, hiding her from the bustling crowd of nobles and courtiers. The grand hall where the ceremony was held was a place of legend. Its high ceiling was painted with stars that glimmered even in the daylight. Golden chandeliers hung like constellations, casting light over rows of nobles, their gowns and armor glittering with magic. The air was thick with anticipation, with the scent of roses and incense. With the soft hum of whispered prayers and hopes, Ilara's heart pounded as she slipped through the crowd. Her stepmother had stationed guards and servants to keep her away, but Ilara's small frame and careful movements allowed her to avoid notice. Every step was a battle against fear, every breath a prayer for courage. And all the while, she felt eyes upon her, though she could not see them. A pull, invisible and powerful, tugged at her soul, guiding her closer to the center of the hall. At the front of the hall stood the Alpha King, a figure of unmatched presence and power. His armor gleamed like obsidian under the light of the chandeliers. His eyes were sharp and piercing, like twin storms. Yet there was a depth to them that no one dared to approach without trembling. Legend said he could command the wind, call the shadows, and see the truth hidden in every heart. And yet, in that moment, his gaze seemed to find something or someone beyond the crowd. Ilara felt a strange shiver run through her. The pull grew stronger, as if the very air between them was charged with destiny. Her stepmother's cruel words whispered in her mind, but they seemed distant now, meaningless against the force drawing her forward. She did not know if the king would notice her, or if she would be swept away by the tide of the ceremony. But still, she moved, step by step, toward the impossible. The courtiers murmured as they watched the Alpha King. Whispers of fear and awe filled the hall. He was a man who chose only the most worthy, the most extraordinary. Many had tried to attract his attention with beauty, wealth, and skill, yet few had succeeded. And yet now, as Ilara moved closer, the king's gaze did not waver from the far end of the hall. Time seemed to slow. The music of the ceremony faded into silence in Ilara's mind. She felt her pulse in her ears, the tremor of her hands, the rapid beat of her heart. And then, as she stepped into a small pool of light near the center of the hall, she felt it the king's attention, sharp and undeniable, like the first strike of lightning against a stormy sky. A hush fell over the hall. Nobles turned, puzzled by the sudden intensity in the king's gaze. All eyes followed, but none could see what he had seen. Ilara's stepmother, hidden in the shadows near the entrance, froze, her face pale. Her plans had failed. Somehow, Ilara had appeared in the hall, unseen and unchallenged. And now the Alpha King's eyes were fixed upon her. Ilara felt a mix of fear and wonder, of disbelief and hope. Could this be real? Could she, a girl her stepmother had said was too ugly, too plain, too insignificant, actually be noticed by the most powerful man in the kingdom? Her chest tightened with emotion, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel invisible. She felt seen. The Alpha King's steps echoed through the hall as he began to approach her, slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving hers. The courtiers whispered and gasped, unsure what to make of this boldness. Ilara's knees trembled. She wanted to run, yet every instinct told her to stand her ground, to meet the gaze that seemed to pierce her soul. And then, just as he was nearly before her, he stopped. A single hand reached toward her veil, lifting it gently. The hall held its breath. Ilar's face was revealed to everyone, and the king's eyes softened, as though he had seen a light that had always been hidden. "You," he said, his voice low but commanding, carrying across the hall like a summons, "I have been searching for you." Ilara's heart leapt. Every fear, every doubt, every cruel word of her stepmother vanished in that moment. Yet she did not understand what he meant. She had only just stepped into the light of the hall, and already the currents of destiny were pulling her into something far greater than herself. Her stepmother's face twisted in shock and fury, but she could not move. She had failed. Ilara had crossed into a world where power, fate, and unseen forces chose their own. And in that world, Ilara's life and heart would never be the same. The Alpha King's hand remained near her face, as if deciding, as if confirming something only he could know. The murmurs of the court swelled into a wave of astonishment, and in the silence between them, Ilara felt a truth she had never known. Something extraordinary had begun, something that could not be undone. And then, as the king's eyes met hers once more, the hall seemed to hold its breath. For the first time, Ilara realized that she was no longer just a girl hidden in shadows. She was the beginning of a story written by fate itself, and fate, it seemed, had chosen her. Cliffhanger. As the king's hand hovered near her veil, the room seemed to still, the future uncertain. Ilara's stepmother seethed in silence. The whispers of the court grew louder, and the king spoke again, his voice carrying a weight that made Ilara's heart skip. "Come with me. You belong where you have never dared to stand." Ilara's heart pounded as she stepped forward. Guided by the commanding presence of the Alpha King, the murmurs of the court had grown into a hum of astonishment. But she barely heard them. All she could feel was the pull of destiny drawing her closer to the man who had seen something in her that no one else ever had. The Alpha King's gaze was unwavering, sharp, yet strangely tender, like lightning and warmth entwined. His eyes were a storm of authority and mystery, yet beneath it there was a flicker of curiosity, almost wonder. He was a man who had faced countless battles, commanded loyalty with a word, and held power that could shake kingdoms. And yet now, he looked at her as though he were searching for a truth only she could reveal. Ilara's steps faltered for a moment. Fear and awe mingled within her chest. Could she, a girl hidden in shadows all her life, truly belong here, in the grand hall, beneath the gaze of the Alpha King? She felt small, yet something deep within her stirred. Perhaps it was courage, perhaps it was destiny. But she stepped closer, lifting her chin, meeting his eyes with a quiet defiance that surprised even herself. The king's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. It was not a smile of vanity or approval, but something different, an acknowledgement. It was as if he had been searching for her all along, and finally he had found her. The energy between them was almost tangible, a silent current that hummed in the space between their eyes, between their hearts. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low, but carrying through the hall. There was no mockery, no doubt. Only a question heavy with curiosity and destiny. Ilara hesitated, her tongue tied by awe and disbelief. I am Ilara," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the court. The Alpha King inclined his head slightly, as if testing the name on his lips. "Ilara," he said again, slower this time, as if tasting it. "So it is you." Ilara felt a shiver run through her. How could a man, a king of such immense power, know her name as though it were written in the stars? Her stepmother, watching from the shadows, clenched her fists. She had tried to hide Ilara, to ensure no one noticed her, yet here she stood, illuminated by destiny itself. The court was silent now, every eye fixed on the pair. Nobles whispered, exchanging anxious glances. They had come to see the ceremony, to witness the Alpha King choose his destined mate. Many had assumed it would be one of the finest women in the kingdom, adorned with magic and beauty. Yet none had expected this a girl who seemed ordinary by all worldly measures. Standing before the most powerful man in the kingdom, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and determination, Ilara felt a warmth rising in her chest. For the first time, she did not feel unworthy. Perhaps she had been too long in the shadows, too long hearing cruel words and doubting herself. Yet as the king looked at her, she sensed something extraordinary, a recognition not of beauty alone, but of something far deeper, something unseen, something powerful. The Alpha King extended a hand, his armor gleaming like dark metal in the candlelight. "Come with me," he said. The hall seemed to hold its breath. "There is much you do not understand, but you have been chosen, and now you will learn." Ilara's heart skipped. Chosen by him? She glanced toward her stepmother, whose face was a mask of rage and disbelief. But the stepmother's words no longer held power. This was no longer about beauty or approval. This was about destiny. With trembling fingers, Ilara placed her hand in the king's. The moment their skin touched, she felt a surge of energy, like a current passing through her veins. It was not frightening, but awakening. She felt strength she had never known, a confidence that seemed to whisper in her mind, "You are more than you know. You are not to be hidden." The king led her through the grand hall, past rows of astonished nobles, into a long corridor that opened into a private chamber above the throne room. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles, queens and kings of long ago, and candles flickered like captured stars. Here, away from prying eyes, the king finally released her hand. His gaze never left hers. "You are different from the others," he said quietly. "Most come seeking favor, beauty, or ambition. You carry something else. Something rare. Something that calls to me." Ilara swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. She had never considered herself special, not in any way that mattered. I am nothing," she said softly, though the truth was beginning to stir within her. "I am not nothing." The Alpha King studied her as if weighing her words against some unseen truth. "You are not nothing," he said. "You are a part of something far greater, something ancient." His words stirred a mixture of wonder and fear in her. Ancient. Greater. What could she, a simple girl hidden away by cruelty, possibly have to do with anything ancient or powerful? And yet the king's gaze was not empty or idle. It held certainty. it held weight. And in that certainty, Elara felt a flicker of hope. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then the king's hand moved, lifting her veil completely. The room seemed to hold its breath. Elara's face was revealed, and she expected shame, embarrassment, or dismissal. Yet the king's expression softened, not with judgment, but with recognition. "You are the one," he whispered, almost to himself. "The one I have been searching for." Elara felt her knees weaken. Could this be true? Could she, who had been hidden, ridiculed, and ignored, actually be the one chosen by the Alpha King? Her chest tightened with emotion, and for the first time, she felt a sense of belonging. A sense that she was meant for something extraordinary. But before she could respond, a shadow passed across the king's face. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he glanced toward the doorway. Elara followed his gaze and caught sight of a figure lurking in the hall, a sorcerer of the court, known for mischief and dark whispers, who had long envied the king's favor. The man's eyes glinted with malice, and his hands began to move in strange, secretive gestures. Elara's heart leapt with fear. She could feel a tremor in the air, a subtle but undeniable shift, as though something dangerous had been awakened by their meeting. The king stiffened, sensing the same threat. He stepped forward, placing himself between Elara and the sorcerer. "You must trust me," said his voice low but firm. "Whatever happens next, do not falter. You are stronger than you know." Elara nodded, though her heart raced with doubt and fear. She had never faced anything like this before. Yet, for the first time, she felt that she was not alone. She had the king, and perhaps something far deeper. Guiding her, the sorcerer's eyes narrowed, and he muttered an incantation that caused the air to shimmer and twist. Shadows began to ripple along the walls, stretching and curling as if alive. The nobles gasped and recoiled, but the king's hand shot out, a gesture of command, and the shadows froze, writhing but unable to move closer. Elara felt a surge of courage she did not fully understand. She had been hidden, denied, and dismissed her whole life. Yet now, here she stood, in the presence of a king and an unseen power that pulsed through the hall. And she realized that she had a role to play. She was not a victim. She was not invisible. She was part of something greater. The king's eyes softened as he glanced at her. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked. Elara shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, I don't. But I will follow you." The king nodded, a rare and small smile touching his lips. "Good. Then stay close. The path ahead is dangerous, and those who would harm you are already moving." A sudden movement near the doorway caught Elara's attention. The sorcerer had vanished, leaving only a whisper of cold wind behind. The hall seemed to exhale, but the tension remained. Elara realized that her life, which had always been quiet and hidden, was about to change in ways she could never imagine. And then the king turned his gaze fully on her, his eyes locking onto hers with a power that made her heart race. "Elara," he said, his voice a low command and a promise all at once. "The ceremony is only the beginning. Your destiny is far greater than you know, but you must be ready to face it." Elara's chest tightened with a mixture of fear, awe, and anticipation. She had been chosen, seen, and pulled into a world of power and mystery, and yet she understood, deep in her bones, that danger and challenge lay ahead. Cliffhanger. As the king extended his hand once more, a shadow flickered in the doorway, an agent of darkness who had been waiting for this very moment. Elara felt a chill run down her spine. The world she had known was gone, replaced by one of destiny, power, and unseen threats. And the king whispered, "Hold my hand, if you dare." Elara clutched the Alpha King's hand as they moved through the quiet corridors of the palace. Far from the grandeur and noise of the court, the grand hall, where she had been revealed and chosen, seemed a distant memory now, replaced by shadows, flickering candlelight, and the hushed pulse of secrets. She could feel the weight of what had just occurred pressing against her chest. The world she had known full of ridicule, cruelty, and quiet invisibility was gone, and yet she could not shake the trembling of fear that mixed with an unfamiliar thrill. The king led her through a doorway. into a chamber that felt older than time itself. Ancient tapestries lined the walls, their threads depicting battles long past. Queens whose eyes seemed to follow those who entered, and kings who bore the same commanding presence as the Alpha King himself. Candles glimmered in sconces, and the air was thick with the scent of herbs and incense that carried a faint magic of protection. Alara took a hesitant step forward, feeling her cloak brush the floor. Her mind raced. She was here, chosen by the king, yet she could not shake the thought that she had stepped into a world of danger. Already, the memory of the sorcerer's shadows in the hall made her pulse quicken. She had been hidden all her life, and now she was visible not only to the king, but to forces she did not understand. The Alpha King's gaze remained fixed on her, sharp and searching. "Ilara," he said quietly, "you have been brought here for a reason. The prophecy that guides this kingdom. It speaks of one like you, one who can awaken what has been lost, who can see through the shadows and bring light where others have failed." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am just a girl. I have no power, no skill. I am not worthy of such words." The king stepped closer, the space between them charged with something beyond words. "You are worthy because you do not know it yet," he said. "Your strength is hidden beneath what others call weakness. Your heart carries a courage that no one else possesses. And that courage is why fate has brought you here." Lara's mind spun. She had spent her life being told she was plain, ugly, unworthy. She had believed it. And yet, here was a man, the most powerful in the kingdom, telling her that she had courage and strength beyond measure. Her chest tightened, and a tear threatened to spill, not from sadness, but from disbelief and hope. Perhaps she had been wrong to doubt herself all along. Perhaps she had been hiding a light even she did not know she possessed. The king's hand, still extended toward her, was steady and commanding. "Do not fear what you do not yet understand," he said. "There are powers in this world that will seek to harm you, forces that will try to undo what destiny has begun. But you will not face them alone." Lara nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she felt the possibility of belonging, of being more than the girl hidden in shadows. And yet fear lingered. She had always been cautious, always careful. Could she truly step forward into a life of danger and destiny? Before she could answer, a sudden movement in the chamber caught her attention. A figure cloaked in black emerged from the shadows, silent and deliberate. The sorcerer from the hall had returned, his eyes glinting with malice. Ilara's pulse quickened. She had thought she had escaped him, but he had been waiting, watching, planning. The king stepped in front of her, his presence a shield against the threat. Shadows began to curl and twist around the sorcerer, as though the very air resisted his magic. "You are too late," the king said, his voice low and steady. "She is under my protection now." The sorcerer laughed, a sound that echoed like cold steel on stone. "Protection," he sneered. "You cannot guard against what is coming. She is only a girl. You cannot stop the prophecy from unraveling. If she fails..." Ilara's hands trembled, but the king's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "Do you see now?" he asked softly. "The world you have known was only the beginning. Your courage will be tested. Your heart will guide you, even when fear threatens to take hold." Lara took a deep breath, feeling the king's words sink into her. She was not just a girl hidden in shadows. She had been chosen for something greater. Something beyond beauty, beyond approval, beyond fear. And if she faltered now, she could not hide. She had to step forward, even into danger. The sorcerer's hands began to move again, weaving a spell that made the shadows stretch toward Ilara like living fingers. The air grew cold, heavy with magic, and she felt a shiver run through her body. She wanted to run, to retreat into the familiar safety of the walls that had always sheltered her. But she did not. She looked to the king, and his presence gave her a courage she did not fully understand. "Focus," he said, his voice a quiet command and encouragement all at once. "Your fear is not your weakness. It is your guide. Use it." Ilara closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a deep breath. She felt something stir inside her, a small spark, like a light hidden in the dark. She imagined that spark growing, pushing back the shadows, surrounding her in warmth. When she opened her eyes, she raised her hand, and to her surprise, the shadows recoiled. Twisting away from her as if afraid of the force she had awakened, the sorcerer's laughter faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. "Impossible," he muttered. No one is ordinary," the king said quietly, finishing the sentence for her. "She is extraordinary, and she will stand where others fall." Ilara's chest swelled with a mixture of fear and triumph. She had faced the sorcerer's threat, even if only for a moment, and had discovered that her courage, her very presence, could shape the world around her. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The sorcerer's form shimmered and disappeared, leaving only the echo of his malevolent presence behind. The king turned to Ilara, his eyes softer now, filled with approval and a hint of awe. "You are learning," he said. "There is much more ahead, and each step will test you. But know this, you are not alone." Ilara's heart raced. She felt a connection to the king that went beyond words. He was not just a figure of power and authority. He was a guide, a protector, and perhaps something even more. Her chest tightened as she realized that the pull she had felt in the grand hall was more than destiny, it was recognition. Something ancient, something unspoken, bound them together. The king extended his hand once more. "Come," he said. "There is a place where you will learn the truth of your role. There are forces you must understand, powers you must master. And above all, there are choices only you can make." Ilara nodded, her hand trembling as she took his once more. With each step, the palace corridors seemed to stretch and shimmer, as though the very walls recognized the weight of what was unfolding. She was no longer just a girl hidden in shadows. She was part of a story that had been written long before her birth, and the chapters ahead would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. As they walked, the king spoke of the ancient prophecy that had brought them together. He told her of the Alpha lineage of rulers who had faced curses, darkness, and betrayal, of a hidden power that only someone like Ilara could awaken. The weight of the knowledge pressed on her, but it also filled her with awe. She was part of something vast, something ancient, and her choices would shape not only her own destiny, but the fate of the kingdom. Ilara's thoughts drifted to her stepmother, who had spent her life trying to hide her away. The bitterness and cruelty of those years felt distant now, overshadowed by the realization that her worth was not dictated by anyone's words. She had been chosen not for beauty, not for status, but for something far deeper, courage and strength that no one else possessed. And yet, even as she embraced this new reality, she sensed that the path ahead would not be easy. The shadows lingered, threats remained, and the sorcerer's presence was only a hint of the dangers to come. She would need all her courage, all her wits, and all the guidance of the king to survive the trials that awaited. Cliffhanger. As they reached the door to the inner chamber where her training and awakening would begin, a sudden chill filled the air. The king's eyes narrowed, and his hand tightened on hers. From the shadows, a low, haunting voice whispered her name, a voice that was both familiar and terrifying. Ilara felt her blood run cold as she realized that someone or something had been waiting for her arrival, and it was far closer than she had ever imagined. Ilara followed the Alpha King through the inner corridors of the palace, a labyrinth of stone and shadow that seemed alive with history and secrets. Each step echoed in the silence, and the flickering torchlight painted strange patterns on the walls, making the tapestry seem to move. She felt both awe and fear. This world, hidden from her all her life, was vast, powerful, and dangerous. And yet, she was no longer invisible. She was chosen. She was seen. The king led her into a chamber that smelled of herbs, parchment, and old magic. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, scrolls, and objects that pulsed faintly with enchantment. It was a place of knowledge and power, a sanctuary, and a battlefield of the mind. Here, Ilara would learn that courage alone was not enough. She would have to understand the forces around her and awaken a strength she did not yet know she possessed. "Here," the king said, gesturing to a circle inscribed on the floor with silver runes. "This is where your training begins. You must learn to sense the energy around youth currents of the kingdom. The whispers of the past, the shadows that seek to corrupt. Only then can you face what lies ahead. Lara's heart raced. She had always been timid, cautious, and unsure of herself. Yet, the king's gaze did not waver. His eyes were steady, commanding, and filled with the same certainty that had first drawn her into this world. She took a deep breath and stepped into the circle. The king began to guide her through exercises that tested her focus, her perception, and her courage. He asked her to feel the currents of the palace, to sense the presence of those who had come before, to perceive danger before it arrived. At first, Alara struggled. Her mind wavered, her fear clouded her senses, and the shadows of doubt whispered that she was not enough. But the king's presence was constant, steady, and unwavering. He spoke words of encouragement and instruction, and slowly, Alara began to feel the threads of energy around her. She felt the pulse of the palace, the warmth of its protective magic, and the faint stirrings of ancient power within herself. Each small victory strengthened her, and with each success, she felt more connected to the destiny the king had spoken of. Days passed in this rhythm of training and discovery. Alara learned to read the movements of the court, to anticipate dangers, and to sense the intentions of those around her. She discovered that the shadows, once frightening and unknown, could be understood and even turned aside. And with each lesson, her confidence grew. She was no longer the girl hiding in the corners of the castle, silenced by fear and cruelty. She was a part of something greater. Her courage was a force that could shape the world around her. Yet, even as she grew stronger, the threats did not disappear. The sorcerer who had confronted them in the hall remained at large. Whispers of other enemies began to reach the king's ears. He did not speak of them to her, but Alara could see the tension in his posture, the tightness in his jaw. She sensed that the dangers ahead would be greater than any lesson she had faced so far. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of training, the king led Alara to a balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The moon was high, casting silver light over the fountains, statues, and carefully tended flowers. The world seemed peaceful, almost serene, but Alara knew better. Darkness lingered, hidden and patient, waiting for the moment to strike. "Do you understand why I have brought you here?" the king asked, his voice quiet but firm. Alara nodded slowly. "Yes, you want me to learn, to be ready, to face what is coming." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching. "It is more than that. You must understand your own heart, your own fears, your own desires. Courage alone is not enough. You must trust yourself, even when the world tells you that you are weak. And you must trust me. Though it will not always be easy," Alara felt a lump in her throat. Trust had been a stranger in her life, replaced by fear, doubt, and betrayal. And yet the king's presence was steady, a constant she could rely on. "I will try," she whispered. "That is all I ask," he said, his voice softer now, carrying a warmth that made her heart flutter. "But know this, there will be moments when you will have to choose between safety and destiny, between what is easy and what is right. Those moments will define you more than any lesson I can teach." As they spoke, a sudden rustle from the shadows made Alara jump. Her senses, sharpened by days of training, alerted her to the presence of another. From the darkness, a figure emerged, someone she did not recognize, yet whose intent was clear. A thief? A spy? The tension in the air was electric, and the king's hand moved to rest on the hilt of his sword. Alara's pulse raced, but she did not step back. She felt the courage growing within her, the spark of power and purpose that the king had awakened. She stepped forward slightly, her hand brushing the edge of the silver circle on the balcony floor, and felt the faint surge of energy beneath her fingers. The figure froze, sensing the force in her, and then, without a word, retreated into the shadows. The king exhaled slowly, his gaze lingering on Alara. "You felt that?" he said. "You sensed the danger before it reached us. That is progress." Alara's chest swelled with pride and relief. For the first time, she understood that her instincts, her courage, and the spark of something ancient within her were tools she could wield. She was no longer entirely at the mercy of the world around her. She could fight, defend, and even influence the outcomes of events she once believed were beyond her control. Days turned into weeks, and Alara's training continued. She learned to read the whispers of the wind, to feel the tremors of magic, and to sense the presence of unseen forces. Each lesson was challenging, each trial pushing her limits. And yet with the king's guidance, she began to master what once seemed impossible. Through it all, their bond deepened. The king shared stories of the kingdom's past, of battles fought, of curses broken, of sacrifices made. He spoke of loneliness, of duty, and of the burdens that power carried. And Alara listened, her heart reaching out to the man who had seen her worth when no one else had. She began to understand the weight of his life, the isolation that came with being the alpha, and the quiet longing that lingered behind his commanding presence. One night, as the moonlight poured into the training chamber, the king approached her. "You have done well," he said. "But the greatest trial is not the mastery of skill or power. It is the mastery of the heart. You must be ready to face choices that will test who you are, what you believe, and who you trust." Lara nodded, feeling the gravity of his words. She had grown stronger, braver, and more confident. Yet, she knew that the trials ahead would demand even more. She could feel the weight of destiny pressing against her, reminding her that the path she had chosen, her, was filled with uncertainty and danger. Cliffhanger. They prepared to leave the chamber for the night. A low, resonant sound echoed through the palace halls, a warning bell, ancient and foreboding. The king's eyes narrowed, and he took Alara's hand, his grip firm and urgent. "They have come," he whispered, his voice edged with both fear and determination. "The forces we thought distant are closer than we imagined. And now, we must act, or everything we have built will be destroyed." Alara felt her heart pound in her chest. Darkness was approaching, stronger and more dangerous than ever before. The safety of the palace, the lessons she had learned, and the bond with the king were all about to be tested. And she knew, deep in her bones, that there was no turning back. The warning bell had barely faded when the palace erupted into movement. Shadows swirled through the corridors, and distant shouts echoed as servants and guards hurried to their stations. Ilara's heart raced, but she did not falter. The training, the guidance, and the courage she had discovered within herself now demanded action. The Alpha King held her hand firmly, guiding her through the labyrinthine corridors toward the highest tower of the palace. "They are coming for you," he said, his voice low but commanding. "The forces that have lingered in the shadows will not wait. But you are ready." Alara's pulse thundered in her chest. Ready, she had felt fear every day of her life. But now, with the king's presence beside her, she felt strength she had never known. "I will not hide," she said, her voice steady despite the tension. "I will face them." The king's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, revealing something private and tender beneath his commanding presence. "Good," he said. "Then let us show them the power of destiny." As they reached the top of the tower, the night sky stretched endlessly above them. Stars glittered like shards of crystal, and the moon cast a silver glow over the palace. From this height, Ilara could see the outer walls, where shadowy figures began to gather agents of the sorcerer. Dark forces bent on destruction, and warriors twisted by envy and malice. The threat was real, immediate, and terrifying. The king placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Do not be afraid," he said. "The strength you have discovered is not just skill or power, it is heart, courage, and purpose. That is why they cannot harm you." Lara took a deep breath, feeling the energy that pulsed through the palace, through the runes, through herself. She stepped forward, raising her hands as the currents of magic she had been learning to sense began to hum and flow. The shadows recoiled slightly at her presence, as if recognizing her awakening. She was no longer merely a girl hidden in the shadows, she was a force, as a part of something ancient, something destined. The first wave of attackers struck at the gates. The king's soldiers met them, but Alara sensed the threads of the battle before it happened. She called out directions. guiding the defenders with precision born from instinct and the lessons she had learned. Every move, every choice, strengthened her confidence and reminded her that she was no longer powerless amidst the chaos. The sorcerer appeared, stepping from the shadows with malice in his eyes. "You think she is strong?" he hissed at the king. "She is still a child, untested and weak. This palace, this kingdom, it will fall." The king stepped forward, his presence radiating authority and command. "She is no child," he said, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "She is the chosen, and she will stand when others falter." Alara felt a surge of determination. She had been hidden all her life, denied, told she was too plain, too weak, too unworthy. And yet here she was, chosen by the Alpha King, tested by trials, and standing at the forefront of a battle that could change the kingdom's fate. She would not fail, not now, not ever. The sorcerer cast a spell, and shadows lunged toward her. But Alara raised her hands, drawing on the currents she had learned to sense and control. Light pulsed from her fingers, a steady glow that pushed back the darkness. The shadows shrieked and twisted. Unable to pass the force of her courage and determination, the king moved beside her, their energies mingling in a protective circle. Together they formed a barrier that no shadow could penetrate. The sorcerer's eyes widened in disbelief. "Impossible," he shouted. "No one, you underestimate her," the king said, finishing the sentence. "She is stronger than you know." Yoletta felt a strange calm in the storm of battle. She could feel the connection between herself and the king. A bond forged not only by destiny, but by trust, courage, and understanding. She realized that her strength was not just magic or skill, it was heart. It was compassion, courage, and the willingness to stand even when fear threatened to overwhelm her. The sorcerer's form shimmered, preparing for another strike, but before he could act, Alara stepped forward with purpose. She spoke words she did not fully understand, yet they carried power, ancient and undeniable. Light surged from her, forming a barrier that pushed the sorcerer back, scattering his shadows. For a moment, silence fell. The air shimmered with energy, and the king's gaze softened as he looked at her. "You have done it," he whispered. "You have faced what most would run from, and you have prevailed." Ilara's chest heaved with exhaustion and relief. She had faced danger, fear, and the unknown, and she had not faltered. For the first time in her life, she felt the fullness of her own power, the truth of her own courage, and the unshakable certainty that she belonged not only in the palace, but in the story that destiny had written for her. The sorcerer, realizing his power was broken, fled into the night, leaving only the echoes of his malice behind. The king turned to Alara, his eyes filled with pride and something deeper, something tender and unspoken. "You are magnificent," he said softly, "brave, strong, and unafraid. And this is only the beginning." Alara felt warmth spread through her chest. She had been chosen, tested, and affirmed. Her heart swelled with gratitude and awe. And as she looked at the king, she realized that their bond was no longer only about destiny. It was about trust, understanding, and a connection that neither time nor darkness could sever. The palace slowly returned to calm. Soldiers tended to the wounded, the gates were reinforced, and the night settled once more over the kingdom. Yet Alara knew that the world had changed. She had changed. She was no longer the girl hidden away by a cruel stepmother. She was a force, a chosen one, a heart strong enough to face darkness and light alike. The king placed a hand gently on her cheek. "You have proven yourself," he said, his voice low and intimate. "Not just to the kingdom, not just to me, but to yourself. You are no longer hidden, Alara. You are seen and you are powerful." Alara's eyes glistened with tears, not of fear, but of relief, joy, and the quiet triumph of being truly recognized. I understand now," she whispered. "I am not nothing. I am me." The king's smile was soft, a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who had carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. "Yes," he said, "and you are more than you know. Together, we will face what comes next." Together, we will protect this kingdom, and together, we will shape its future. Ilara felt a rush of hope, courage, and a newfound sense of belonging. The trials, the shadows, the fear, they had all led her here, to this moment of recognition and awakening. She understood that life would always hold challenges, that darkness would return. But now, she knew she had the strength to face them. As dawn broke over the palace, casting golden light across the towers and gardens, Ilara and the king stood side by side. The air was crisp, the world silent in anticipation. She felt the weight of destiny on her shoulders, but it was no longer a burden, it was a promise. A promise that she had the courage, heart, and power to face what was to come. And as the first rays of sunlight touched her face, she realized that her journey had only just begun. But she would no longer hide. She would no longer doubt herself. She was chosen. She was powerful. She was ready. Final emotional cliff, as the king lifted her hand to his lips in a gesture of solemn promise. A soft breeze carried a whisper from the distant hills, the faint voice of the sorcerer, returning. Ilara tightened her grip on the king's hand, her heart steady and unafraid. Darkness may return, she thought, but so will I, stronger than before. And in that knowledge, she felt the first true taste of freedom, power, and the unbreakable bond of trust and destiny.